Hey, this week we're back and we're talking about Wine 10 and x86 emulation on ARM. There's a bunch of Linux 6.14 news, and there's the Nvidia RTX 5090 reviews on Linux. It's a lot of fun, and you don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is the Untitled Linux Show, episode 187, recorded Saturday, January the 25th. Don't fear the Copilot. Hey folks, it's Saturday. It's time to get geeky over Linux and open source, all kinds of fun stuff. I'm your host, Jonathan Bennett, and it is time for the Untitled Linux Show. And it is not just me, of course. We've got a trio of co-hosts. We've got Rob and Ken and Jeff, and they are here ready to go, prepared for action, locked and loaded with some stories. And we are going to let Rob go first. And
is Rob going to be whining?
Well, see, I was going to say something about he's going to get his wine uncle on. But you've got a story, Rob, about wine, and no, not fermented grape juice, but the Wine is Not an Emulator project. And we had a milestone. We had a big milestone we just hit.
Yeah, well, even though it does do some emulation these days also. But so this week, a new release of Wine has come out. And yes, they have hit a major milestone. And does anyone know what that major milestone is?
10.0?
Well, it is release version 10.0, but that isn't a milestone. That is just an arbitrary number. It really doesn't mean anything other than, let's say it's 10.0 now. The big milestone is Wine has been released with native Wayland support, using Wayland by default. But it is able to fall back to X11 if required. But who needs X11 these days? That's the big milestone. Wayland default in Wine. Wine 10.0 features an improved Wayland driver with OpenGL support, proper positioning of pop-up windows, and auto repeat key support. Also, on the video side of things, it has improved HDMI support for scaling on modern displays. All things that are going to make Wine even better for your modern desktop displays. Other features include an initial Bluetooth driver, improved ARM support implementing x86 emulation interface in its ARM builds. So even though Wine is not an emulator, there actually is some emulation going on these days. The devs say it, quote, takes advantage of the ARM64 EC support to run all the Wine codes as native, with only the application's x86-64 code requiring emulation. It also has full Dvorak keyboard support, direct 3D support enhancements, FFmpeg-based backend alternative to GStreamer. It's an opt-in experimental feature. And for us gamers, this just means more gaming goodness as these features work their way into Proton in the future. So big milestone there, and 10 is just a number.
10 is just a number. So a couple questions. First off, you said HDMI support. I don't think Wine has HDMI support.
I said high DPI support.
I'm sure.
Sounded
like
HDMI to me too.
All right, so high DPI.
Improved high DPI support for scaling on modern displays.
All right, now that we have that one settled. The other thing is the ARM64 support. What exactly is the scenario where someone would take advantage of this?
I believe this is running Wine on ARM.
So you've got a Windows binary that's on x86, and you want to be able to run it on an actual ARM64 piece of hardware.
Yeah, I believe that's what that is.
Well, looking at the Wine release notes, the ARM64 EC architecture is fully supported with feature parity with the ARM64 support.
Yeah. So
and the 64-bit x86 emulation interface is implemented. This basically takes advantage of the ARM64 EC support to run all the Wine code as native, with only the applications x86 64 code requiring emulation.
So I am wondering who is pushing for this, who would be interested in running Windows binaries, probably games, but just in general, Windows binaries on ARM64 targets. Are there some tea leaves to read here?
And you're already, I know you're thinking like Valve type of things.
I'm going to say crossover.
ARM-based.
So anybody.
Weavers.
So what this is for you have a piece of ARM64 hardware, whether that's one of these new ARM laptops, or whether this is a handheld gaming rig that runs on ARM instead of x86. And if this would let you much more capably run Windows games on it. So somebody cares about this. It's one of two things. Either one of the Wine developers has one of these ARM64 laptops and they're really interested in, or maybe it's for the Raspberry Pi for that matter. I mean, maybe one of the Wine developers is a really big retro game enthusiast and wants to be able to play some older games on the Raspberry Pi, and emulating x86 Windows on the ARM Raspberry Pi or on ARM laptops or on ARM handhelds doesn't necessarily work very well. So someone has spent, I'm assuming, quite a bit of effort to make this work now, and it sounds like it's actually starting to work fairly well. That's just fascinating to me. It makes me wonder what the exact scenario is that led to this.
Now, would you need 16 gigabytes of memory for doing this?
It depends on what game you're trying to run, what Windows game.
Yeah, if you're running a Windows game from 2002, probably not.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not. Although, Ken, are you talking about video card memory?
Actually, no, just memory in general.
Oh. I thought he was setting Jeff up because Jeff has a story about
Though there could be an option for video card memory with ARMs. Couldn't there?
Yeah, I thought there was a segue there. But
yeah, let's kick it over to Jeff and learn about the new thing in the insane GPU race that's going on right now.
Yeah, so we're going from handhelds to liftable gaming machines with proper form, and don't use your back, use your legs, be careful, get a good grip. But for those that don't keep up with graphics hardware, Nvidia announced the launch of their RTX 5090 graphics card. It was announced at CES, and the embargo officially lifted a couple days ago. Right now, social media sites are flooded with gaming performance reviews comparing the 5090 mostly to the previous generation 4090, because it's kind of the direct comparison. NVIDIA themselves even said that the 5090 card is geared more towards the prosumer or people doing computational workloads, and that's the reason they gave it 32 gigabytes of RAM. And AI workloads I throw in under computational. For gamers, they're saying it will be the 5080, which is the dedicated gaming card, but for gaming, the 5090 is still going to be faster. It's just more expensive. It's the top of the line flagship product, and flagships are not value purchases. Now, we're bringing this up because there's a Linux spin on this, and Michael Larrable over at Phronix has a 5090 that was sent to him, and he did some testing. Now, this is going to be a little different because there actually isn't a released video driver. So there's actually an early release video driver, meaning beta. It's 5070.86.10 driver to be exact. The driver does work with the 5090 where earlier drivers don't. The beta driver has the latest CUDA 12.8 package, and NVIDIA says you shouldn't use that driver for graphics and gaming workloads. They recommend waiting until the official driver is released at the end of the month. So today's benchmarking is all going to be CUDA and computational performance without any graphics or gaming performance. The benchmarks of the older cards were rerun with the latest 565.77 driver, and the 5090 used the beta driver. Michael includes cards from the 2000, 3000, and 4000 series, and from the low end of each of those series to the high end. The operating system he used was Ubuntu 24.10 with the 6.11 kernel. And keep in mind, these results are with a beta driver, but because it's CUDA, which has got a small revision, it should be pretty comparable to the release driver since it's a stable part of the driver stack. CUDA's been around for many, many years. I'm sure Michael will check it out just to verify if there are any changes from the beta driver to the release driver, but we're not really expecting anything to shift. Now, if we take a look at the results of the over 60 benchmarks which were ran, not only did they consist of CUDA, but also OptiX, OpenCL, and Vulkan Compute benchmarks, with the geometric mean of all those showing that the 5090 is around 30% faster than the 4090, which, when looking at the Windows gaming benchmarks, it's about the same percentage. I can't say anything about Windows Compute benchmarks because I've not found any compute benchmarks run by the normal tech sites, Gamers Nexus, Hardware Unboxed, Level 1 Techs, all the big ones. Mm-hmm. Now, Level 1 Techs talked about compute performance, but they're going to do it on Linux, and they're waiting for the official drivers, so nothing was done there. So I only personally know of Michael's compute benchmarks. There could be others, but I haven't seen them. Now, 30% sounds like a decent improvement, but the downside is the 5090 costs about 20% more or more for this generation of card. It's $2,000 for the Founders Edition and will be more for the Partners cards. Now, the Partner cards, those will be the Asus, MSI, Gigabyte, those cards. So based on their custom coolers and all that, they are going to cost more, but I have not seen any pricing yet. They should be out. The pricing list should be out soon, and then we'll be able to see how bad it's going to be. The other downside is power, and Michael recorded a peak of 584 watts. Now, when you look at the performance per watt, it's the high end of the charts for being inefficient. It's not the worst, but it's in the running for the worst. One bright side is, while it takes all that power, the actual core temperature was in the middle of the pack. So the new cooling system that you can see described in the Gamer Nexus video, they go into great detail on it. It actually does a pretty good job of eliminating that much heat. Now, I'm going to give my personal opinion based on all the reviews I've seen on Michael's and all the other stuff, is because overall, Michael doesn't say that much whether he recommends the card or not. He just presents the facts and lets the readers decide for, he's pretty neutral when he released all the data. Personally, I'm going to follow along with Hardware Unboxed, where they said if the 5090 was released as the 4090 Ti, nobody would bat an eye. Because of the performance uplift, because of the price, it kind of is what you would expect from a 4090 Ti. But because it's a new generation, people expected more, and the reviewers in general gave a pretty lackluster view of the card. Sure, it's faster, but it's taking a lot more power and money, and so the overall cumulative end result is meh. Take a look at the article in the show notes so you can see all the different benchmarks, and you can decide for yourself whether this is an upgrade you want to pursue, or you might let this generation pass you by. Though I say that with keeping in mind that most people will not get a 5090 and it will be more interested in the mid-range and lower range cards. Over the next few months, we should see the benchmarks on those as well. And when they come out, I'll be sure to let everyone know what the results are and keep everybody up to date.
Yeah, so it is good enough that Nvidia has yet another money printer, right? For where the market is, for the group of people that need, actually legit need this sort of hardware, it's going to be an instant buy. This is yet another money printer for Nvidia.
Probably,
and maybe even a good space heater.
Well,
and a
space heater, sure. And I'm not thinking, and Jeff, when I say that, I'm not thinking about gamers. I'm thinking about people that want compute, and particularly those that are working on AI and LLM stuff. They're going to go, oh, it's 30% faster. Take my money. Here, I need as many of those as you can give me.
Well, and that, like I said, that's why it comes with 32 gigs of RAM in it. GDDR, I forget. I don't remember if it's 6 or 7.
Yeah, what do we got to these days?
Yeah, it's a lot faster than the 4090 memory pathways wise. But yeah, it's going to be for those people, because when you start looking at the professional cards, oh my gosh, the price on those, wicked, $2,000, and you can do your work versus getting some of the high end cards. Oh, that's okay. I'll buy 12 and still save money. You know, it's and the power they take, you're not running off of regular, like the US 120 volt. You're into the 240s, or you're switching over to like 3-phase power distribution units, or PDUs, to be able to power these racks that they put them in.
Yeah. You're hooking it up to a dedicated 3-phase power supply coming off of with 240 volts in.
Or higher.
Somebody will inevitably, there will be, it's like server cases, full 48U server cases that are just servers with these things racked in them. And, you know, somebody's going to build a server farm out of those, and it'll power the next big thing in AI probably. And yeah, this is yet another money printer for Nvidia. No question.
Yeah. And depending on how many you stick in that server rack, that you could be running, say, 480 volts, 3-phase, 50 amp. Maybe you have multiple of those circuits. So and then cooling is a whole nother, you know, how do you keep all that cool and whatnot? Just kind of note here is some of I think the performance uplift too, being a little lackluster, was also, people have kind of been blaming it on that the 4090 was built on TSMC's 8 nanometer node, and so is the 5090. So it's the same process node as the previous generation. Now,
that actually makes the uplift fairly impressive then, if there's no bump from the node.
Well, but they added a whole bunch more cores, and the memory bandwidth went way up. And so, I mean, the process node helps, but it's not the only thing. I mean, you're right. You got a lot of design that you can do to make things a lot faster while staying on the node, but it kind of helps to jump both of them up to.
Yep.
And we'll see how it's going to work within AMD, because the rumors on the street are that these cards are going to be very limited for several months. And right now, AMD is talking about they're going to release their cards about March, because they're waiting until it's ready. They decided they're not going to launch at the same time as Nvidia, because then they have egg on their face, because maybe the drivers aren't quite ready, or they've got some hiccups. And there's talk of they're also building up inventory. So if the Nvidia cards are all in the hands of scalpers and things are ridiculously expensive, AMD comes out with some good cards and plenty of supply, they could really make an impact on the market and get their market share back up, at least partially.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. So next, we are going to move into a story about FOPD. I have too much fun saying that. But yes, Ken has that one.
And we'll probably end up using it for updating the firmware on those video cards at some point. But Marius Lester wrote about the 4th maintenance update to the latest release of the open source Linux firmware update utility for Linux-based operating systems. I've got to say it this way too, Jonathan. FOPD 2.z.4. This release introduces new features like the ability to record the entire USB descriptor in the emulation data and return defined return code when network metadata refresh fails. It also adds the unifying bootloader vid/pid as a full instance ID, a more specific instance ID for QC-S5 Gen 2 USB devices, fadvice 64 to the systemd syscall allow list, and allows disabling of the zero-length pocket for modem manager devices and recovering of the Logitech Bolt receiver in bootloader mode. Now, also fixed in this release is a possible critical warning for MediaTek scalar devices, an issue with fire hose padding for some modem manager devices, and an issue with UEFI capsule updates when using 96-byte NVMe block size. Bug fixes include improving FOPD to correctly parse CSV streams that do not contain trailing nulls, disable reading the option ROM device after dumping, and no longer claim the kernel interface to avoid parade downstream port resets. I recommend reading Marius's article since I've only touched on some of the improvements in FOPD 2.z.4, and I feel like Elmer Fudd every time I say FOPD.
It's interesting that they're playing with the USB descriptor stuff. I've been working on with that sort of thing a little bit here recently on another project, and it's interesting. You know, you've got the VID and the PID. That's like so the VID, that's the vendor identifier, and you have to pay $6,000 to the USB consortium to get one of those, and then you can issue your own PIDs, and so you'll have that pair of 2-byte. I think it's 2-byte identifiers. 2-byte for the VID, 2-byte for the PID. And the fact that they're looking at making those, it seems like a little bit more fine-grained in doing things. It makes me think that maybe they accidentally pushed firmware. You know, one company has multiple devices under the same VID but different PID, or maybe even a different USB descriptor that's yet another string that's in your USB stuff. It makes me think that they are accidentally pushing firmware to the wrong device. And somebody complained about it. But yeah, interesting updates here.
Yeah, especially if you've got a vendor that's putting out pretty much the same model. The only difference may be the difference in capacity or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could see somebody reusing a PID and just having a different device descriptor string, and that could cause problems.
It definitely would if you're using FOPD to update it.
Yeah, potentially. All right, Rob, what is this? What are you doing? What are you doing on my podcast talking about this stuff? Rob has a story about Copilot, and depending upon how this goes, he may or may not be back in the future. Anyway, Rob, take it away and tell us what this is.
Copilot is here, and it is here to stay. And with that, many new keyboards are coming out with the new Copilot key. Now, I'm sure all the Linux users are concerned that, now they're going to have another useless key in the future on the keyboard that, that doesn't do anything. But, just like when that nasty Windows key came out and we had no use for that, we took that key, we made it a super key or a meta key and offered our own functionality to it. So too will we do with the Copilot key. As of Linux kernel 6.14 updates to the keyboard driver, now map the F23 key to support the default Copilot shortcut action. So what will this key do for us? Well, nothing yet, I guess. The support is there in the kernel, and now the desktop developers will need to decide what to do with it. What are some of the commenters saying? Some have said, I would like to use the key for toggling between applications like Alt-Tab or switching to another TTY where HTOP runs. One said it would be bound to his OS update script. And another says, actually, this is mine. I say I would like to see it just be a programmable by default. Just do whatever you want with it. And I know you could essentially program any key, but just make this a programmable by default key. Somebody else in the comments says they're adding a key, or they aren't adding a key. They just took away my right control key. Yep. MS took away your right to control, and injected their spyware button. So,
that's great.
It is as it is. Let's make the best of a situation.
Yeah, so apparently vendors are calling it F23. I didn't know that any keyboards had that many function keys. So as soon as you have the new kernel, then your Copilot key will be just another key code, and you can do whatever you want to with it. It'll show up in KDE, it'll show up in Gnome, it'll show up in all your applications. You know, your press the key now to bind, and it'll just work now with 614. So
don't fear that Copilot button.
Don't fear the Copilot.
Assuming you have a meta key. The old IBM Type M's, just there's a gap there.
Yep. Bring back the gap.
Yep.
All right.
Gap.
Then my muscle memory would be out of place.
Yeah. All right.
It's still in the same location. All the keys are still in the same location.
Guys,
I'm used to using the meta with the page up for going to full screen.
Oh, I see.
Meta page up. There are some weird keyboard shortcut combinations out there.
Yeah,
and that one's available in KDE.
Are there any new keyboard shortcut combinations in Gnome? Maybe Gnome 48, Jeff?
There could be. So we've been doing a lot of talk lately about KDE and the upcoming 6.3 release, which will be out in a couple weeks. So I thought we should give a little love to Gnome. So this week we're talking about how Gnome 48 Alpha is now out for public testing. If you look at the link in the show notes, there's an article going over what's new in this version. The software package manager has received an experimental plugin, which should give improved performance when you're loading updates. When looking at software you might want to load on your system, there are improvements to the upvoting and downvoting reviews so you can better decide what to get and what to pass over. And when getting those packages of software, there's now support for including dependencies when estimating download size. There's also improved uninstallation of snaps, and Gnome will let you know about microphone permissions when an app has Pipewire access. Gnome 48 has on-screen display notifications for headphone connections and support. Support if you desire for screen time and health breaks, and support even for screen time limits. So coming as well is improved color management, support detection of preferred primary display devices, frame rate on monitors attached to secondary GPUs in copy mode, and better accessibility of the keyboard backlight toggle in quick settings, which quick settings also has an improved appearance. For accessibility, Gnome has Orca, which is a screen reader, and it has improvements as well. They're replacing the handling of when a program admits too many events from handling to protection. So the program stays responsive when a program floods Orca with too many items. So it goes off the rails and suddenly floods it. It got better handling and not just overwhelmed. There's also better logic, so it can tell if an object is only layout and not actually conveying other information. And it's now better support for Orca to speak the digits for a telephone number independent of the user settings. Many apps inside Gnome also got some love, such as a calculator, which receives some pressure units, and a keyboard shortcut for clearing up history. The Epiphany web browser now has a warning when you want to disable a website's data storage, and it has better history function. The Control Center now has support for battery charge limitation in the power panel, and other apps like the front viewer, clock, snapshot, Sudoku, and many other items are receiving feature improvements and polishing. If you take a look at the article linked in the show notes, you can see all the details, and if you so desire, there's a link to the actual discourse or Gnome announcement page where you can look at the changes per library. So, see? And this goes for you, Rob. I can give Gnome a little love.
I'm happy to see that.
Yeah. It sounds like it's not a world-rocking release, pretty much.
You missed the killer feature in there.
What's the killer feature, Rob?
Which one's that?
Updates to Sudoku.
Yeah, I mentioned Sudoku had updates.
No, you mentioned it, but Jonathan's saying it's not a big killer update. He apparently didn't hear you say that.
Yeah, I guess I don't hold Sudoku in quite as high of esteem as I should.
You're right. It's kind of 48 is going to be a lot of polishing and kind of refinement, and not any major earth shaking. But that's probably good, because a lot of times that's when they break the API and make everybody mad. And
I was just thinking about that. It's like, what, Gnome decided they weren't going to make everybody mad this time?
Yeah.
I guess that's in every other release. Maybe Gnome has an odd. No, is it their odd releases that tend to tick everybody off? I don't remember.
Well, maybe they're just saving it for 50.
I guess
That's what I was thinking. 50.
50 will be the big one. Yep.
And then you'll see another fork.
Inevitably. I mean, a project as big as Gnome, forks from time to time are inevitable. It's a question of how popular they get versus the original sort of mother project.
The next will be turmeric.
Turmeric, huh?
Because they have cinnamon.
Mm-hmm.
He's making a spicy joke.
It's spicy.
Well, and the thing is, the hard part is when they branch off, a lot of times it can cause problems later on, like going to Wayland. That was a major issue for some of those pre-Wayland forks. And
yeah,
I believe they've gotten there, but it's taken
it's experimental.
Major, but yeah, it's a major effort, because they kind of wound up coding themselves into a corner, so to speak.
Yeah, and so there's the question of do you do all the work yourself, or do you try to rebase on top of the upstream Gnome? And if you do the rebase, are you going to not accidentally, but are you going to end up pulling in all the code that you wanted to avoid to start with? And yeah, it's a challenge. It's kind of nice, at least for forks, that we are now on the other side of the Wayland issue most places, and that not going to be quite as big of a deal going forwards. But
yeah, so we shouldn't have any major groundbreaking until we replace Wayland, which hopefully it'll last, at least 20 years.
Even OpenSUSE got LXQt on Wayland recently. So
yeah, it is a little different though, because with Wayland, the desktop environments are doing, and to some extent, they have to do more of the work themselves. Whereas with X11, a lot of that work, like a lot of code, lived in the X11 code base. In Wayland, there really isn't any code that lives in the Wayland code base. The Wayland code base is really just the specification, and you sort of get to do all that work yourself inside of your desktop environment. So it is just a little different. Well, right. It is the compositor specifically that interfaces with your graphics driver and all of that. And there's not, as far as actual running code, there's not actually a lot of Wayland that exists up there. It's just sort of the specification.
That's why they have that reference compositor, just to
WL roots.
Well, so they can just say, well, here's an example. You can.
I think there's actually some desktop environments that just use WL roots, isn't there? I can't remember off the top of my head which one it is, but
there's not any still using it.
There probably are. I'm sure there are.
Even I don't remember what it was, but last time I was on the show, the desktop environment I talked about still use WL roots, but they planned to create their own compositor. I remember that much of it, but I can't remember what desktop environment I was talking about. What?
Yeah,
was that Solus? That was Budgie, I think. I think Budgie still is using it, but they plan to make their own.
Yep.
And then I talked about LXQT last week about how they're setting it up so you can just combine it with any compositor you want.
Is Sway a desktop environment? I think Sway is the compositor. Yes. So a building block of a desktop environment. I was looking quickly to see if I could tell which ones were out there that still use WL roots and or Sway. Not immediately seeing the answer, but I'm sure there's at least one of them.
LXQTs are going to be used.
There you go.
Use it.
There you go. All right.
WL roots, it'll at least get you off the ground, because you still have to support probably a lot of other code, and that at least the code surrounding the compositor you can get ready, and then while you then write your own compositor, so you can kind of attack it from two different angles.
This is sort of a bootstrap process.
With all of this, multiple compositors and everything, are you going to need a way to boot between multiple live CDs?
Well, that's an interestingly great segue to Ken's next story. This is something that I actually run as well. I don't know if it was Ken or Rob or Jeff. One of you guys really got me started on this, and it's become an indispensable part of my toolkit. And that is Ventory. Ken, what is new with Ventory?
Well, actually, Bobby Borisroff wrote about what is new with Ventory, the popular multi-boot utility for creating bootable USB drives for ISO files, released a brand new version, 1.1. The new version updates the latest shim, effectively fixing the verifying shim SBAT data failed error. The update also resolves any associated secure boot issues, making the entire boot process more secure and straightforward. Now, on the bug fix side, the developers tackled the boot issue affecting System Rescue 11.02 Plus, so you can rest assured that your rescue and recovery environment will be ready whenever needed. Some minor bug fixes have also been polished, rounding out the overall user experience. On the OS side, Ventory 1.1 expanded its support to the, I hope I'm saying this one right, UOS ISO. It's a muscle-based, lightweight, general-purpose rolling release distro. Now, I looked this up just so I could understand what muscle-based meant. It's basically an easier way to say based on the C standard library developed by Rich Felker. The muscle provides consistent quality and implementation behavior from tiny embedded systems to full-fledged servers. Also, I wanted to give you a tip when using Ventory. F2 will allow you to directly browse and boot files on your local disk. As always, check out Bobby's article for anything I didn't cover.
Yeah, muscle. I'm trying to remember exactly what that's a reference to. It's like the Mu C library, something like that. But you see it on. I'm trying to remember where exactly muscle gets used. OpenWRT might use muscle. I don't remember. I think Alpine Linux uses muscle, if I remember correctly. Yes, there's a couple of them out there that use it. It's an interesting little alternative C standard lib. That sometimes
for the record,
pain to work with.
Don't say. And for the record, I was the one that introduced you to Ventory. It was in episode 12, August 7th, 2021.
Yep.
That long ago.
I am the one who introduced you to iVentory.
Well, that's true. That's two different projects. What's the difference between those two, Rob?
iVentory, that's the Pixie boot.
Right. Yeah.
And you pay to be able to use it for ARM devices.
Yeah. Fwandel in the chat points out that it's Alpine Linux that makes use of muscle. I was thinking that. I may or may not have said it, but if I didn't say it, it is Alpine Linux. There we go. My brain is already on the next thing, trying to keep it going. Yeah, I'll have to go grab the Ventory 1.1 update. I will say this. If you go to update your ISOs on Ventory, test them before you need them. Because sometimes, like particularly with a bleeding edge distro like Fedora, you will occasionally run into problems if you have not updated your Ventory often enough. And then you end up in desperate times like having to boot back into Windows. It's terrible.
Terrible.
Yeah.
That's why you have two Ventory drives.
Yeah, would be the way to do it. Yep. All right. Well, Rob, I've told people for a long time, just don't use suspend. And for the longest time, I know suspend was terribly broken on Linux on almost all hardware. And
not as bad as Hibernate.
That's true. Suspend is not as bad as Hibernate.
Might as well just shut down if you're going to use them.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I figure.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of thought upgrading SSD, made startup and shut down
so fast that who cares?
Right.
That's not necessarily the case, though, is it? You've got a story about this.
No, I thought it made start and shut down fast enough. I thought an SSD, would make suspend and resumes fast enough. Faster than I could ever need. But for some, you can never be fast enough. And I guess that is why another update to the 6.14 kernel included ACPI updates switching from the msleep function to the usleep_range function within the ACPI_OS_sleep function call. In the kernel, reducing sleep time due to timer inaccuracies. The Linux ACPI/PM maintainer Raphael Isaki of Intel, who authored this change, noted that it could spectacularly reduce the duration of system suspend and resume transitions on some systems. This addresses bug reports back from 2022 on a Dell XPS laptop, taking 8 seconds to suspend and 8 seconds to resume. Another report suggests this ACPI change noted another Dell XPS laptop giving a kernel resume time of 1.9 seconds down to 1.1 seconds. Raphael said, quote, "The extra delay added by msleep to the sleep time value passed to it can be significant, roughly between 1.5 nanoseconds on systems with HZ equals 1000 and as much as 15 milliseconds.
Yeah.
Yes, 15 milliseconds on systems with HZ equals 100, which is hardly acceptable, at least for small sleep time values." And another bullet point, he says, quoting him, he says, msleep on the default HZ equals 250 and Ubuntu on the modern PC takes about 12 milliseconds. This results in over 800 milliseconds of spurious system resume delay on systems such as the Dell XPS 139300, which use ASL sleep parentheses 5 milliseconds in a tight loop. So keep looking for more efficiencies, even if sleep, resume, hibernate is a waste of time like some of us think. If you like using it, it's going to go faster for you now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if this change is I think it's just related to sleep and resume. It's not necessarily they switched from msleep to usleep range. So essentially what's happening here is when they were using the old msleep time, it was inaccurate, right? So they would say in the code, it might say, we'll do an msleep for 5 milliseconds, and it would actually do an msleep for 12 milliseconds, which is hardly anything. Like just those two, you would not ever notice those, right? But in the midst of like a not a shutdown script, but like a hibernate script or a suspend script, you might have 75 of those calls. And well, you have enough time add up through all 75 of those calls that suddenly you have, an extra second or multiple seconds of time. So yeah, it's just one of those things where someone sort of did the math, right? This is what this sounds like. He did the math and went, wait a second, this doesn't add up. Dug into it and go, that's why it doesn't add up. It's because msleep is not accurate for small sleep times. So very cool.
So
does it even really work on Windows? Because I know at one time even Windows had problems with all the sleep and.
I think pretty much all OSs sleep and hibernate work a lot better than they did, say, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember. I've seen a couple of videos from people that actually knew what they were talking about discuss how much of a kludge, just a terrible, terrible hack, all of the like sleep states and hibernate, all of that is. It's just all sort of flaky and held together with duct tape and bubble gum. So it's not all that surprising that it goes wrong from time to time. I have fixed multiple people's computers for them just by finally getting the thing to come out of hibernate. Right? Like you got to unplug it multiple times. I've seen this where like on a laptop, you got to take the battery out, wear out the power button for a minute. Then you can put the battery back in. It'll do like a fresh boot rather than trying to come back from hibernate or come back from suspend.
Bonus Windows tip: power CFG space / hibernate space off, or even just /H off, space off.
Disable hibernate.
Yeah, I do that quite a bit.
It saves you some gigabytes on your hard drive space too, doesn't it?
That's usually why I do it when somebody's running out. I'm like, you don't need to hibernate anyway.
Yeah,
save you 20 gigs.
Yeah,
or save more space and don't have Windows.
It's always an option. Windows for the longest time had this terrible bug that it would just fill your hard drive up with hundreds of gigabytes of log files from, I think it was trying to compress the log, and the compression would fail, and it just would never clean up the old files. I've ran into this has been a couple of years ago now, I guess, but I've run into that problem on several computers.
Oh yeah, I've seen 50 to 100 gigs of log files, and
that's why you'd reinstall Windows every 6 months.
That's one of the reasons. All right, now let's talk about something that is not Windows, but you can have a lot of fun with, and that is the Steam client. Jeff, what is new in the Steam client?
Well, we've talked about a new series of GPUs. We've talked about a new desktop. Now it's time to talk about gaming. Steam had a January client update, and I think we should take a little time to go over what they've done, because after all this hard work, we need to relax a little. So the update was released on January 21st. If you don't have it yet, you don't need to worry about actively downloading it, as your Steam client will automatically update itself the next time you start it up. Valve added a global setting for improved management of game updates, along with a panel to manage per-game exceptions to the global settings. If you have a game that's actively downloading, you can click on the game image on the downloads page, and it will now take you to the game's library page. There's also an updated layout for the actively downloading game. So the client now has better caching of soundtrack album covers in the library, and improved library asset loading times for large libraries. If you use streaming, things should be better now, because they fixed a case where Steam would prefer to stream from another PC on your local network, even if the game was installed on the PC that you're sitting at, and you could play it without streaming. So even if you were sitting at your local machine, you were like, oh, I'm going to play this game, it would try to stream it from another machine in your house that had that same game. So now it shouldn't do that. Now, for Linux-specific issues, they fixed a case where Steam could permanently stop the screensaver if it crashed while holding the screensaver lock. There was a potential crash when exiting a game when game recording was enabled on the system with recent versions of Pipewire. If you had a high single-core CPU usage with a large library during Steam startup, this should no longer be a problem. And when using Steam player-to-player voice chat in games, there should no longer be a crash. They also fixed a crash in the game recording viewer caused by unstable VAAPI drivers. And finally, for Linux, they fixed a rare crash when hot plugging a mouse and keyboard into your system. There were some other little bugs in Steam input that could sometimes cause crashes, and those should be gone now as well. Now, there are many, many other fixes that have been added to the client, so I suggest you take a look at the article in the show notes for full details. And there's also a link to the article to the actual Steam client update announcement from Valve, where every single update is listed and organized in an easily readable format. So, happy gaming.
Fun stuff. I have to look into the fix where it blocked your screensaver. I always had trouble with my computer failing to sleep the monitors overnight, and particularly worrying about burn-in with that. So
go ahead.
I'm now down a little bit of a rabbit hole trying to figure out what's the command to tell your screens to go to sleep. It's like, I'm sure there is one.
Based on the bug, I believe you need to go in and delete a lock file.
Yeah, that makes sense too.
Because it would basically have that lock file crash, and then that lock file just stayed there.
Yeah, I have found somebody's project to be able to put their machine to sleep, and it's a bash script that's essentially one line in a bash.sh. And people on Reddit are, of course, flaming this guy for, why did you make this a bash script when it's a single command? That's hilarious. So look forward to that in a future command line tip.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Ken, you've got the last one from you guys. I've got one story to follow up with after this, but Ken is talking about Rhino Linux. What's new there?
Yes, and we can thank Marius Nestor for writing about the latest release of Rhino Linux, 2025.1. Rhino Linux is an Ubuntu-based distribution offering a rolling release model on top of a stable desktop environment. So there is a version of Ubuntu that you can use that's rolling release. Rhino Linux 2025.1 includes support for dynamic workspaces in Rhino's XFCE-based Unicorn desktop to automatically create new workspaces when opening applications, a new custom Grub bootloader theme for more modern feel, and a new testing meta package called Rhino Stampede. In addition, it introduces a brand new companion application called Hello Rhino, written in Rust and iced TK, that makes it easier for users to access Rhino Linux's homepage, blog, Discord community, and most importantly, documentation. Under the hood, you find Rhino Linux 2025.1 powered by Linux kernel 6.12 and using Packstall 6.1.z as an AUR-inspired package manager. It also updates the kernel on the Pine 64 images to Linux 6.9 and the kernel on the Raspberry Pi images to Linux 6.11. Rhino Linux announced they will be at FOSDEM 2025. They will be giving a talk on the distro's track about the creation, maintenance, and future of Rhino Linux and Packstall on this coming Sunday, February 2nd at 2:30 p.m. Universal Time.
Interesting. Is Rhino Linux one that you would recommend for some of our listeners to give a try?
If you want a rolling release, yeah.
And who doesn't?
I actually watched the release DistroTube on YouTube. DT, he went over it and it looks pretty nice. The one thing is I wish it had KDE.
Mm-hmm.
But otherwise, I thought it looked really nice. And
yeah, Rhino is not an official Ubuntu or canonical thing, right? It just happens to use their
yeah.
All right, interesting, very cool. Yeah, very cool. All right, I do have a story, and it is a follow-up to something we've talked about in the past, and that is the CashFS merge that got blocked for the Linux 6.13 kernel. I did not make secret that at the time, and I'm still of this opinion, that is a terrible policy to keep particularly bug fixes out of the Linux kernel as a punishment for anyone. I just think it's a fundamentally flawed policy for multiple reasons, which I'm going to do then. I will not go over again, but it's a bad idea. Please stop it. But I'm happy to say that the 6.14 merge window of the kernel is now open, and the bcachefs changes, which was quite a large set of changes, was pulled in with absolutely no problem. It was not held up. There was no fuss made. It landed, and you're going to get all of your new fixes in bcachefs in 6.14. So they did indeed follow through. The Linux Code of Conduct Committee in Torvalds, they followed through that it was only to be a one version ban, and things are once again working the way that they are supposed to. So for that we are thankful. I am glad that this is the story we are covering and not something else about CashFS and all of this mess. So it's good to have them back. It's good to be back. It's good to have them back.
Yeah. No kerfuffle, thank goodness.
No more kerfuffle. Yes, absolutely.
So basically, we the users got punished for that.
Yes, that is a part of why I think it is such a bad idea.
Only the Bcash users, which is really small.
Well, I read that and I looked at that story, and it seemed like, it definitely punished the users a little bit, but it seemed like there was some extra coding that went on. So this code that got merged in is a little more polished now, but it is a different format. So you've got to have a conversion because the base structure or whatever changed, and they got revision numbers on it. And so, but there's, I guess, a tool that should convert it for you.
Yeah, so I mean that was one of the other things that had been complained about with BCashFS, completely separate from like the code of conduct stuff. This is something Torvalds complained about. It is that they tended to sort of play fast and loose with pushing code in that maybe wasn't quite as polished as it should have been, and so like there is a sort of a devil's advocate point that we should not let them push code. We should always force them to be a month behind like this, and maybe we would get better code out of the BCashFS project. And that's sort of a separate issue. But I'm just glad that they're back and that we can push things forwards, and hopefully we won't ever have to have a story like that one again. Maybe that's a little over optimistic from me, but I'm hopeful.
And I looked it up. The disk format change the version goes from 1.13 to 1.20. And they're saying that should be the last format change they're planning.
The last one for sure. Really, really this time, guys.
Yeah.
R3.
Yes.
No,
this was an RC. Sorry.
Yeah. All right. Let's get into some command line tips then, and we're going to let Rob kick us off first with Ignition.
So, as I start to use Linux Mint, one thing I notice is it does better than, say, Ubuntu is how a user manages startup applications. Ubuntu startup applications makes you navigate using a file manager, pop up to the exact .desktop file or runtime needed, which is, it's okay for devs and app images, less obvious for apps in other formats. Linux Mint is more user-friendly and informative with simple toggles, startup delays, and simple ways to add new startups. So I'm not going to tell you how to run Mint startup application in Ubuntu or on other desktops, but instead offer an alternative called Ignition. Ignition comes to us from the developer of Warehouse, which is a Flatpak manager we've spoke of in the past. Ignition does everything the Ubuntu startup app does, but easier and better. It's an opinion, but Ignition provides a simple UI adds to add, remove, modify startup entries on your computer. Ignition can add apps, scripts, and arbitrary commands to the login. You can try it yourself in Flatpak. And for those watching, I have a quick little side by side here. On the left here is Ubuntu startup applications, and on the right is Ignition. It looks about the same here. Now, if I go to add a startup application in Ubuntu, I could put a name, I could browse, and it doesn't look all that friendly. That looks not great. And you can put a comment and not a whole lot else. That's great. Let's go over here to Ignition. If I hit new, I can add an app or a command or script. Let's start with the app. Well, look at this. It shows all my installed apps, and I could just pick one. That's seems quite a bit easier. Let's just run software on startup. And you can have it enabled. You can do a name. You can do a comment. The commander script there. You could show it a terminal. Would it make sense for this? And then you can create. Also, if you wanted to do a command or script, you have the add a command or script. And with that, you can basically just put in here any command you want. When I was playing around with it, I put in this echo hello command, and then show it in the terminal. So when I start up, I get a nice little hello. Which, not very useful, but I was just testing it to see how it plays around. So it still could add some new features like delays, but if you're comparing that against the very basic Ubuntu startup one, I think it's a lot better.
All right, good stuff. Now, the question that I have is, can you run Ignition on other distros, or is it Mint only?
Other distros, it's not even Mint at all. This is Ubuntu I was running it on here.
Right.
It's a Flatpak, so you could run it anywhere Flatpak could run. One caveat, for example, if you already have startup things added via, like, say, the Ubuntu startup preferences, when you first start up Ignition, they're not going to show up in there because of the sandboxing. Now, anything you add into Ignition will show up in your other startups. A quick way I found to get around that is, like, for those, when you're looking here, you see like this SSH key agent. That was a default one that was already in Ubuntu right at the beginning, and it did not show up in Ignition at first. I disabled it in here. And as soon as I disabled it, it showed up here, and then I was able to enable it again and manage it within Ignition. So that's a little caveat to be aware of if you already have things added through the normal interface, and then you start using Ignition because of the sandboxing.
Yeah. All right. Very cool. All right, Jeff, I see you have one here that is very much in your wheelhouse.
Yeah. The command line tip I ran across. Well, I ran across this command line tip when I was trying to help a friend pull data from a hard drive. It was a Western Digital NAS that died on them, and they couldn't access the disk. But they'd read it was a Linux file format. Well, they didn't have Linux, and they're not very computer savvy, so I was asked to help. Now, there were some issues, and I needed to see where the drive was located in the system. And when I mean located, I mean is in the /dev mount point, and it wasn't readily visible. A little searching had me find the lsscsi command. So it's lsscsi, which is a command that lists information about SCSI devices in Linux. Now, that might not sound super useful to most people because most of us don't run a SCSI device, but it also picks up ATA, PCIe, SAS, USB, and many other drive interface formats. So it's more than just SCSI, even though SCSI's in the name. Now, I installed it just from the normal Ubuntu repositories, and the simplest way to use it is simply type in your shell lsscsi. Now, it'll give you a readout of the drives on your system, tell you a lot of information about, what your disk is, the name of the drive, where it's mounted in the /dev directory. There's a -H, so you can get the size of the drive in human readable format. There's a verbose option, which gives a lot more information. And you should really read the man page for what every item is. And of course, there's a --help. But, I'm not going to go into the deeper commands and interface specific options, because there's specific, SAS commands, SATA commands, all that stuff. So without making this, an hour-long, even longer podcast, I'll leave some experiment or investigation to the listener and viewer. And if you need to have more information about a drive, take a look at the program, and there's a link in the show notes to a full and detailed description beyond the man page. It's a special page set up, I think, from the people that program it. So it's very helpful. It's organized really well. So each device interface has got its own little subsection. So, give it a whirl. I found it very helpful. So I highly suggest it.
Yeah, interesting. I learned something just now. I think I may have noticed this in the past. So most computers will have like a /dev/SDA. That's if you have a SATA device. The S in SDA does not stand for SATA. It stands for SCSI. SDA is SCSI Disk A. Linux sees almost all disks as SCSI disks. That's fun.
Yeah, and I think, isn't the SATA standard, I think it's kind of a SCSI standard, I thought.
It may be somewhat derived from SCSI. A quick Google shows that they are not the same. And people, it's I think SAS is actually SCSI.
Oh, maybe that's
SATA is not. Yep. All right. I've got a command line tip, and I'm going to attempt to do a screen share with this. Yeah, there we go. That should work. So my command line tip is VA info, which VA info is the VA API info. And when you run it, you should hopefully see this. And this is essentially giving you information about how your video card is capable, and your system as a whole is capable of using your video card to decode video codecs. And so on this laptop, obviously it is a Radeon card. It's running the Radeon SI graphics driver, and then these are all of the profiles that it supports: MPEG-2 Simple, MPEG-2 Main, all the H.264s, several of the HEVCs, and then the VP9 profiles. And the reason that I discovered this particular command is because I was working on trying to get Firefox to do something with live video, or with decoding video, and I was having trouble with it. And one of the things that came to mind is, I wonder if I have VA API set up to be able to actually kick it out to the video card. Found this command, ran this command, to discover that no, I did not have any of the VA API libraries installed. And so I went on a bit of a hunt to get the desktop behind me to show a list very similar to this, that yes, indeed, I can decode video right on the video card. And my hunt for, actually what it is for HDR, is not quite done yet, because the patch is not quite there in Firefox, but it's close. It's coming soon. And I will definitely let you know about it when all that lands.
Nice.
Yeah. All right, Ken. Ken has something that I think dovetails rather nicely onto that.
I do. But I just wanted to say that I found out earlier when I was playing with VA Info that it will determine whether or not you have a Wayland or X11 using. It'll try both Wayland first, and then if it doesn't find Wayland display, it'll switch to X11.
Huh, interesting.
But what I'm going to talk about today, it has to do with controlling your video devices, or even just identifying them. It's a V4L2-CTL. It's part of the V4L utilities. I didn't provide a link to that. I'm going to put that in the show notes after we finish here. But I'm starting off by showing the first part of the output. If you do a -H or --help, it gives you all the general and common options that you can run. I tried the --all. Boy, there's a lot of information there. But I'm not going to display that today. What I am going to show you, though, is the version. My case, I'm running V4L2-CTL 1.28.1. I believe that's actually the latest one. And it also shows you the remainder of those options from the help. The next thing I'm going to show you in my third screenshot. By the way, for those listening, I do have a link to a document with all the screenshots, so you can pull it up and look at them yourself. But with the third one, I went and choose list devices. And for those listening, it lists all the devices it found at the time that I had running. One, of course, was my webcam. And it actually sees that as 3 different devices. Device video 1 and dev video 0 and dev media 0. And then it also finds my OBS virtual camera as dev video 2. And it says it's a V4L2 loopback device. Going to the next screenshot, I'm showing how you can use V4L2 to list all the controls that you have. It breaks it into user controls and camera controls. If you've ever used OBS Studio, you may be familiar with some of these because they do appear in there. But the nice thing about this is you can see the minimum, maximum for your controls, what the default value is, and what the current value may be as you're looking. There's also another command. It's option list controls menus, which pretty much shows the same thing, though it does give you some other information that the other one didn't, depending on the device you identify for it. Speaking of which, you can also put in there a -D and specify the device before doing the list controls menus. That way it gives you the specific information for the device. By default, it does go with the /dev/video 0 device if you don't do that, because you'll see it's repeating all that. Now, you can try to, I even tried using a device that was not there, and you'll see that when I did one that wasn't in use, it didn't give me anything for it. And then I started using it to play with some of the controls. Here you're seeing where I used it to get the brightness that I had, even though I already had it shown up there. But it'll come back and give you that the brightness is currently set to 130. And then on the next screenshot, it shows where I actually set that brightness down to 65. And you'll see it does make a bit of a difference in how I look. And then I also set it up to 195. So you can see how it does impact your video camera's operation. So this is one way that you could, from the command line, adjust your video camera.
Yeah, very cool.
And if you got one that supports pan and tilt, you can actually adjust those.
Ooh.
What about focus? What about focus? I have a problem with focus. Can you do that?
They make medicine for that, you know.
And there's also a command out there that you can use that is QV4LT that gives you like a video test for adjusting it. That basically so you can test your setups, adjust different things interactively. Mm-hmm. So if you've got your camera being captured like into OBS Studio, you can then adjust it and see the change immediately in your display in OBS Studio or in Video Ninja, which is what I was using to show that that screen capture there.
Those of us watching Ken's feed probably are asking ourselves whether V4L2 lets you control your camera's frame rates.
It depends on the camera.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is it. That's our show. That's our command line tips. We appreciate everybody being here. I'm going to give each of the guys the last word. If they want to plug anything, they can certainly do that. And we're going to go to Rob first. What does Rob have to plug?
All right. So my usual, except for I've added a new icon.
Mm-hmm.
Come connect with me. on my website, robertpcampbell.com. On there's my links to my LinkedIn, links to my Twitter. Newly added is a link to my Blue Sky. And I don't know why, but my follower count has been going up like crazy, I've noticed. I hadn't even logged in for months, and I logged in and have over 500. No, almost 500. And I don't know why it just keeps going up and up. I don't know if it's you guys or if it's bots or what, but I figured there's a follower base there. I am going to try to be active on there. Also, yeah, it's like way surpassed my Mastodon somehow. But the next one there is my Mastodon, which I will be in there also. And finally, this nice little coffee cup if you want to donate a coffee to me in increments of $5, just because you like what I do and you want me to keep doing it.
Yeah. I've threatened for a while now that I would go and set up a Blue Sky account for Floss as well as for me, just because there are people that are there and it would be nice to be able to have it for them.
I had an invite to that when it was invite only from our very own Mashed Potato. Thank you. Go. But now it's not invite only, so I'm less special than I was then.
You're less special.
But thank you.
Yeah. All right, Ken.
Yes, I do want to share with you a link. I've got it in the show notes that talks about the end of an era for a certain type of device.
Yes.
Sony's Blu-ray media production.
I am not happy about that. I think that is overall a bad thing for the world. I like being able to hold on to my media so that I actually own something instead of just perpetually renting from.
Good news. There's still somebody out there making Blu-ray media.
Mm-hmm.
Pioneer.
There you go.
Well, and it just to clarify, that's for the recordable. So they're still going to sell movies on the Blu-ray discs. It's just you won't be able to use the read-write or write once material. But like Ken said, Pioneer is still making it. They've kind of found a niche market that they've been living in.
Yep. Japan?
Probably some of it.
I'm sure.
Because Japan's got the requirement that you are able to archive, and they're providing archival quality Blu-rays, which they say will last 100 years.
And they're looking at having some that will last even longer.
You have to ask yourself, how do they know that it will last 100 years?
They've tested it, duh.
Think about that for a while, Rob.
Actually, I know how. There's ways you can accelerate wear. So instead of having to have
time machines.
So, right. That's actually an interesting rabbit hole, which we are not going to go down right now. But so what they do is they simulate accelerated wear by doing things like exposing them to wet conditions and then dry conditions and then hot conditions and cold conditions and abrasive conditions. So there's these tests that get designed and you put the media in these tests and you see how it behaves. I'll just throw out there though, that is not actually entirely the same thing as letting 100 years go by. And so we may get 50 years down the road and go, oh, there's an interaction here that we didn't even know about to be able to make a test for.
There is a way to adjust time now. You move deeper into a gravity well and then back out.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Well, I mean, I will say that I understand what you're saying, Jonathan, but there's an actual kind of engineering scientific study in all this, and there's a lot of data and testing that has been done to make sure that you can accelerate wear and it will behave like actual long-term wear. I mean, there's a lot of science and engineering that goes into it.
And in 70 years, definitely. We'll find out how accurate it was.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Like I said, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole right now because that's a deep rabbit hole.
It is.
Jeff knows more about
that. Is that another episode?
That would be probably a few episodes. But I just wanted to basically just point out that it's not kind of like, hey, let's do this, let's do that.
Oh no,
scientific engineering.
it is real engineering. That is for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, that is for sure. It is real rigorous engineering. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
well,
one other thing I wanted to add is this week's command line tip is building up for next week's Pipewire command line tip.
ooh, interesting. All right,
Nice.
cool. All right, Jeff, anything you wanted to plug?
I really don't have anything. So this week it's Poetry Corner again. So the user didn't like how his office was set. He felt a rearrangement would be best. Upon completion, to his dismay, the computer would not respond in any way. Frantically, he called the help desk, submitted an emergency request. The deployed tech knew just what to expect. Into the receptacle, the power cable was set. Have a great week, everybody.
I love it. All right. Thank you guys for being here. I sure appreciate it. And sure appreciate everybody that watches us and listens, gets us live or on the download. If you want more of me, you can check out Hackaday. We've got Floss Weekly is now over there at Hackaday, as well as my security column, which goes live pretty much every Friday morning. And we don't miss mini beats with that. I have a lot of fun there. Yeah, and if you're interested, if you want more, if you want to get the show uninterrupted by ads, there is, of course, Club TWiT, which you should definitely take a look at. It's about the price of a cup of coffee per month, and it is a way to support and show your love for us and the network as a whole, and we sure appreciate everybody there at Club TWiT. We will be back next week, and we will see you then on the Untitled Linux Show.